Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Improv Network podcast. This is a series of longer conversations about all things improv topics. I'm James Quesada.
And I'm Bob Wick.
And for this episode, we have returning guest, our good friend, Mr. Pete Jacokes.
Yay!
Hey!
Hey!
Hi, guys.
How's it going, Pete?
So good.
Yeah.
Look at this new house that you're chilling in.
Yeah, we moved last Friday, and so I'm in my new office.
Whoa!
And I can do this now.
Yeah, before you couldn't move your shoulders. You were wedged between
2021, baby. Yeah. New year, new moves. All right.
Yeah. But also, I now have the Improv podcast poster on my wall.
Yeah. Don't touch it. You're gonna. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and for
the adhesive is really good.
Any listening audience, the Improv Network logo in the top of the streaming screen is perfectly centered in the blank wall space in Pete's screen.
Take it as a suggestion on how to decorate that new space, bud. We'll send you a poster.
Yes, please do. I could use one.
So speaking of which, I do have one of your posters in my car, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
All right. So this episode is going to be the third part of a sub-series of conversations we've been having on directing. The first conversation we had, Bob and I talked about like producing really is what it was, but like directing special events, things like Snow Day, the 24-hour improv marathon that you guys run, as well as more recently or newer event of Digibits, which was a sketch video tournament that virtually
the longest tournament
running virtually.
That ran from March to like September. That was absurd.
Yeah. But special events like that, directing shows in general, directing a process or launching a new idea. And then we talked as a second part more about directing sketch shows, specifically written shows. We talked a little bit about directing like one-act shows, just in general, what comes along with a writing process. For this episode, in the third part, we would like to talk about directing improv shows. And so the reason we've been talking to Pete is because, first of all, Pete it probably might have the most directing experience of anybody that I know. With improv and sketch.
I don't know.
Well, not of anybody that I can think of in the world, but of anybody that I know personally.
I think it's safe to say you have directed both James and I the most. So
that's probably true.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I don't think Pete's ever directed me. Have you? Well, Stage Fright. But have you directed me in
Oh. Well then.
Okay, so with James once.
Yeah. But the point is that Pete, you've directed a veritable shit ton. And a good variety of types of shows. And when it comes to improv, you and I have directed short form and long form. We've done some ongoing long-term shows, and short form and long form, experimental stuff, one-off events. All three of us have all directed improv troupes over the course of a year or more in a weekly run of shows. So we're going to talk about all the things that come along with directing improv shows. Before we jump into it, let me just remind everybody that we are on the Improv Network, And you can go to the improvnetwork.org to check out all of the great resources that are available to you online, including the ability to build yourself an individual improviser profile, a team profile. If you are a theater, you can build yourself a profile for your theater and festivals, whether virtual or fingers crossed, later in the year personal. Those resources are available to you. There are also blogs and interviews on the website, as well as a new page, the Improv FAQ page, which features these conversations, as well as a video lecture series of commonly asked questions about improv. Any other announcements that we need to do up top, Bob?
I think you got them all. I think you're rocking it, man.
Sweet. Oh, one thing I should mention, I've been meaning to.
I was wrong.
I should just clarify this because I know it's a little confusing. We stream on the Improv Network Facebook page. But we stream to the Improv FAQ YouTube page.
Yes.
So just if you're someone who's jumping back and forth, or if you're listening to the podcast and wondering where to find us for video, Improv Network Facebook page, Improv FAQ YouTube page. And
in this near future, we hope to be broadcasting on the Facebook page, the other Facebook page for Improv FAQ, as soon as they allow watch parties to happen again, because those have been canceled for a while.
Wait, they've been canceled?
That and those, and like how people used to be able to make your own frames and everything. All those, I think that's a political thing. They just don't want to. No watch parties, no frames, no nothing.
Because parties.
No what? Yeah, I've been trying to watch party for the last 3 weeks. It would not. It might be personal.
Maybe you've reached your limit on watch parties. You personally
just miss me. No watch parties for Bob Wick.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started with this conversation. So let's start with short form shows. Pete and I have done Go Labs, which is a kind of incubator project of creating short form games, new ideas and whatnot. And we've also pieced that together into a show called Beta Testing, which a number of years ago had a 2-ish year long weekly run.
Long run.
And it was a showcase of those original games. Pete, what would you say?
Also, the beta testing also involved the long form.
That's right.
Long forms too.
First half was short form. Second half was experimental long form, shorter sets. So if you're going to direct a short form show, does it? Let's say first of all, is there a difference in how you start approaching the idea of a short form show versus a long form show, or how do you get started with it? Like when you're gearing up for an improv show?
Well, I mean, when we did beta testing, we basically got the group together 10 minutes before we went on stage and went, these are how the games work. Cool. And then we just went so there wasn't a lot of directing involved in that. It was more, we're pretty sure this is how this game is going to go. Do you have any questions? And then we put them on stage. I
think that's underselling it a little bit. There was definitely a fair amount of directing, if not in the games themselves. First of all, we kept an archival sheet of the games in Google Drive. And then we would schedule a rotating list of 100+ improvisers into the human test subjects roles. And then we would also have to figure out the running order of which games we were going to showcase each week, as well as we would switch the games every week, but we would switch what kind of long form we were doing every month. So there wasn't a lot of rehearsing involved, but there was certainly a lot of
more organizational elements to it, and the creating of everything, because we would do one new game, one debut game each week. Was that what it was?
Yeah. So I think what we were doing is Well, we kind of do too, because every Sunday during the jam, we would take a suggestion to come up with a new game within the time frame of the jam, sort of short term, and then every week we would take a suggestion. We would have 1 week to do that new suggestion. So we kind of do one that had been invented a few days ago, and then a brand new one that we had taken a suggestion for a week ago.
Yeah.
But so let's talk a little bit about just maybe the philosophy of short form, like, just because I think, to me, that's what it really comes down to with directing improv, is making sure that, like, whatever mechanics and form that you're working with, that you're really still playing, like, you're still aiming at a philosophy of some kind, so that you don't just get the surface level stuff. What were some of the things? And we've also, like, we've kind of Pete and I have been trying to develop a book on.
I was about to ask you about that, because you were talking about your archives and stuff, and you've been talking about this book for, I don't know, since the beginning of the world ending.
We started working on it before, like a year before that, or something like that, and then other projects would get in the way, and then we'd be like, no, we're definitely gonna start working on it. And then boom, pandemic, when we have all the free time in the world, but suddenly it was like, nah, we can't work on it. There's a pandemic now.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, hey Mel, how's it going? Thank you again for tuning in, for hanging out with us. Also, Mel, I don't think the other guys have a mug, so I'm assuming you're talking about my mug. Which
I think she's talking about my mug.
No.
She's talking about this mug.
Yeah.
What's your mug?
Is the best. I'm gonna Mel. Which one? Are you
about? You have to be more specific, Mel, because they're both pretty awesome.
Yeah, Uncle Yoda. Okay, but Mel's question is, how do you source debut games? And that's a great question. So for us, what we were doing is, short answer is, we were taking suggestions of pieces of pop culture. For the short form games, we were usually taking suggestions of celebrities or fictional characters. So we'd have games based on like Tom Cruise or Spider-Man. And then for the long form during damn it, Mel says she was complimenting. I think this mug is the coolest. This is Julia's, and it's the Marauders map from Harry Potter.
Oh
wow!
You know what?
Yeah,
you didn't hold in frame long enough. You take quick sips.
It could be anything. This could be Game of Thrones. It's not clear enough. It's a giant mug, but even then, it doesn't really broadcast itself well enough.
You need a ring light, buddy. then everybody can see your mug.
Your mug.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mel. Okay, so yeah, we were for celebrities, and
you guys moved to the Improv Network, and now you're having mug fights. This is great.
Yeah, welcome to Mug Talk.
Celebrities and fictional characters would inspire the short form games, and then for the long form, we would take suggestions of movies and plays. And
do you guys have a favorite game? Like, and what celebrity or movie was it based off of?
Favorite games. I'm going to answer this first, Pete. I know you're a guest, but I have to be.
No, I already know your answer.
Okay, my two favorite games are, one, Enter the Dragon, which is based on Bruce Lee, and it's just an absurd game where you're doing a scene, and anytime the bell rings, you drop everything to pretend like a real dragon has just torn the roof off of the space that you're performing in and is attacking the stage. And you just freak out and panic as much as you can, and then when the bell rings again, you just pick up the scene where it left off.
Right,
and like nothing happened.
My second favorite game is the opposite spectrum, which is a more heady game called Old Dog New Tricks, which is based on the movie The Dog Beethoven. Or I think it might have just been Beethoven. I don't think they intended it to be Beethoven.
Yeah, I think they said Beethoven, and we took it to mean the dog.
Yeah, we were like, not the classic composer.
Yeah, our heads were
movie dog. But in that one, you have 3 people. You could do it with more, but 3 people playing the game, 2 people actively out on stage doing a scene. You just let them go for like 5 or 6 lines of dialogue each, back and forth, and then when the bell rings or you call out shift, the third person from the back tags out one of the people in the 2 scenes. Whoever stays on stage from the previous scene is going to try and repeat all their same lines of dialogue in the same order, verbatim, to the best of their ability, leaving the same gaps for other dialogue in between. But the new person who just tagged in is going to insert new lines of dialogue, recontextualizing the old lines, and rinse and repeat, which I really love. That's my answer. What about you, Pete?
Ooh, well, recently I've really enjoyed Cluster Fun because we've been doing that virtually, and that's a 3-person game. So the 3 people are doing a scene. When the bell rings, 1 person leaves. The 2 people remaining start a brand new scene. When the third bell rings again, 3rd person comes back in. They go back to the 3-person scene. So everybody's responsible for 1 3-person scene and 2 2-person scenes, depending on the combination, and it's just bouncing between all of those. I've liked when we've been doing the show virtually the past couple months. That's been one of the more engaging games. Tell Me Something Good, I think, is a fun one.
Yeah.
That was. Who was Cluster Fun? I think was. All right, wait. Cluster Fun, if I remember, was based on Santa Claus.
Yeah, I think so.
It had a different name, and a different form altogether. And then we reworked it and came up with that version. And it's still somehow connected to Santa Claus. I have no idea why. Tell Me Something Good was based on Shaka Khan, and it's a line game where you get suggestions of stuff that ruin your day, and people step forward one at a time and put a positive spin on it, and then the hook from Tell Me Something Good plays on the soundboard.
Fun music cues are always great.
Yeah. Sell it.
I Lewis Mustache Jr. or Pretty Big Deal, I think, are my other 2.
Wait, are these your favorite because you get to name them, or is it the actual game themselves?
Naming them's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's like the only good thing that comes out of it. The game is garbage, but we absolutely love the name.
Okay, can you give it? Do you guys have an example of best names, worst game?
Yeah.
You got really shot. Yeah.
Right, dude.
So when we first started doing it, we at the beginning of the jam, we'd get a suggestion of a celebrity or fictional character, and then we'd let the jam go on, and we'd run out to the front of the theater or the lobby or the front of the building, and we'd try to figure out how to do the games. And the first game we did worked out really, really well. And then because it seemed like it was fun, the second game we did, it was based on maybe Paula Deen or Julia Child. It was a celebrity chef. And for some reason, 8 people wanted to help create the game. And
too many chefs in the kitchen. Oh man.
I ended up calling it Too Many Cooks.
Yeah.
Just because of that stupid viral video of the Too Many Cooks, Too Many Cooks. So the name was hilarious, but the game was garbage.
the game and the game was like, I think it might have started with like one person's trying to do an activity suggested by the audience, and then a bunch of other people join but make it harder. and then eventually when everybody's on stage, there's something else would happen.
Something else happened. Yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work very well.
No. So listen, I just want to pause and redirect a little bit, because we could do a whole episode on Go Labs and X Factory. I think it's a very cool. The idea of experimenting is really valuable, and we could definitely talk about it. But just since we were on the directing kick, let's bring things back that way. And maybe what we can do is tie in the experimental philosophy with like the directing philosophy, because for us, once we started making that more of a formal thing, it was sort of a casual thing that happened. We implemented some directing philosophy, if like you said, not really like explicit, a ton of direction or rehearsal on the mechanics of the show, but the overall big picture stuff did have direction. And the reason is that the reason that we started making up games is because there were a handful of people that were there at the theater all the time and like always at the jam. And some of those people were also always doing the All-Star Showdown, which is our short form show at Go Comedy. And the games we would get like burnt out on quicker than others, just because we were playing them more frequently. So we got restless with the game pool, and we were like, let's make up some new ones. And long story short, that's what we ended up doing. And then, so that became a really big part of the philosophy is like, don't let yourself get bored. Keep challenging in all these different directions what you're doing. And even part of what, when we first started the show, we did go through like a dress rehearsal for beta testing. And when we first started doing the initial run, we would have a pre-meeting in like the rehearsal room next door to go over everything. But the reason we stopped doing that is because we realized that it was a headache to try and rattle off all these new games and field questions. And then we realized that part of doing good short form is being able to explain how it works succinctly enough to just get up and do it in a jam. And that part of good casting for that show was working with people who were willing to go for it, even if they missed the mark on what our initial intention was.
Yeah, the philosophy kind of became, we just made up this game. So if you mess it up, no, you didn't, because it's never been played before. We're not really sure what the rules are or if this is going to work. So lean into it, go big. And if the game becomes something completely different than what we initially intended, then maybe that's what the game should be. And then we would tweak it. So yeah, there was, there was never like, well, when the bell rings, you're supposed to lift your left foot, but when you did it, you did a headstand. That's incorrect. Like that was never a thing, but it was like.
And what was the name of that game?
One foot in front of the other.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm actively workshopping that game right now. But it was much more. We're experimenting, so cast, go nuts, and don't have the weight of the world on these games. That's sort of the philosophy we had with Go Labs virtually. Was anytime we had a guest come on, we'd kind of rattle off the games, and then one of the things that James or I would always say is, "This is super loose. Like if you're not 100% sure and you take it in a different direction, we'll talk about it afterwards. Nobody, just have fun with it."
I think that is really what is at the root of directing improv, is just really directing people into a mindset more so than into doing things in a particular way. And I have a particular kind of like story about that in the long form side of things, but with
I have one in the short form.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the games we came up with was based on God, now I can't think of his name. From Soul Train.
Don Cornelius.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there we go. It was based on Don Cornelius was the suggestion, so we came up with the game Joke Train, which was Soul Train music plays, two people dance down stage. When the music stops, or we get a suggestion of an object. When the music stops, the first person will do the setup to a joke, and the second person does the punchline, and it's all improvised. And most of the time, the jokes don't land, but it's about selling it and going going as big as you can, and not sweating it. And what's fascinating, what I found incredibly fascinating with that game, was students picked it up no problem. Super easy. They were getting it and having fun with it. And certain improvisers would glom onto it really quick. But like the more seasoned, like the Showdown cast couldn't wrap their mind around it. We had to have like multiple rehearsals for them to like somewhat grasp how this game, and it was like, no, just go like let loose and have fun. And the more seasoned improvisers had like needed to like break it down and see how it, like the moving parts. And it was like, there are no moving parts. It's just about having fun. And I've always found that fascinating, that the more seasoned the improviser, or the more set in their ways the improviser was, they couldn't handle it. But if someone was new or still kind of they'd finished the classes but hadn't found their voice yet, like the game was still super easy.
Well, isn't that a problem with not a problem, but a bad habit with short form in general? People focus so much on the game that they don't make a scene happen. Like they think about the rules, and rather than having a legit improv scene, you just as long as you hit the mark, like, oh, the bell rings, so I'm gonna stand on my left foot.
As long as you're checking those boxes, you're achieving the game. And it's like, no, there's still scene work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be frustrating sometimes. Like you're going for the laugh, you're going for like you just said, like checking the boxes. When you guys are directing, how do you approach that? Like as a note or as a goal? You're on mute, James. Audio guy.
Thank you. My thing on that, on short form or long form, is that the payoff of a challenge, honestly, is struggle and or failure. And the fun of that is undercut if you are not sincerely trying to succeed. So it's like with short form, you're trying to do a good scene at the same time that you're adhering to the rules of the game, assuming that the game is scenic. And also even with like line games, I think this kind of parallels to that too, where if you're doing like a defend the line and you're kind of like you're stepping down and like constantly throwing your arms up, like it's going to happen that you don't have an idea of what to say, and you step out anyway and try to deliver a joke or whatever the rule is. But if you're too willing and too ready to just be like, because there are too many cats, right? Then that'll only work once or twice until people are like, are you even trying to get like, I think that's, to me, is how I give the note, is that remember to sincerely try to succeed as you are knowing that you're going to have a hard time fail.
To piggyback on what
go ahead.
To piggyback on what you said, I like are you talking about, even though there are like the line game is a great example of a game that's not necessarily narrative, but Pete, I think you do a great job of adding your own narrative. So you're not, even though you're Pete playing the game, you have a point of view. So like when we're playing Challenge in a Minute, you basically your first answer becomes like, you know, like your want or your view of the world. So you can always come back to it, and it hits every time because you sold the audience like, this is my point of view, and I'm going to manipulate whatever suggestion I get to fit into this, you know, into the spectrum that I'm going to deliver this, you know, information through.
Okay.
So that was yeah. So I was going to give you a compliment, buddy.
Thank you.
Did you, you were gonna chime in though, Pete?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and I always get flack for this, but and James, we've talked about this before, but my all-time favorite short form game is 1001. And people never understand why. But and I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I can always turn students around on that game because you could go down stage and say, you know, 1001 blah, walk into a bar and the bartender says, and then the bartender says, and like, you could forget your joke. You could like trip over your words, whatever, but no matter what, the back line is still going to laugh for you. So you're even in total failure, you're succeeding because you're getting the big laugh from the back line. And it's a freeing experience I mean, as long as you are sincerely trying, even if you like trip over the finish line, you're still supported. You're still getting that, you know, the laugh from the back line, and they're supporting you. And it's a really freeing feeling knowing that, as long as you're like really like what James was saying, sincerely trying to accomplish it, even in, you know, failure, you're still accomplishing your goal as long as you're, you know, if you go in and you're like, and the bartender says, too many cats, and that's your punchline for everything, that's not going to.
I don't know. If someone really committed to that and said that line for every suggestion, after the fourth time, I think you'd get me. Or they would get me.
Yeah. 1001 cars walk into a bar and the bartender says, no, too many cats.
Too many cats. Especially if you get let's switch gears really quick. So let's talk about, because this is a problem we've run into like during Snow Day when someone's a new director of a short form show, is timing. Like how do you guys set your set list? Most of the time you get 20-25 minutes in a set. Do you have a go-to, or is there like I don't know, an equation you use to set up your set list so it fits within that time?
That's a great question. I should have that, and I don't. I really am. Go ahead.
I usually like a line game is 2 to 3 minutes. Unless it's the game challenge in a minute, because that's, you know, when the title. But a line game is 2 to 3. Scenically, as depending on like how complicated the game is. So like layers is going to take long minutes, or like cluster fun is going to take longer. But usually scenic games, I say like between 3 and 5. Right.
Guessing games. I think we lose a lot of time in guessing games.
Yeah.
Setting it up and because that's been a couple of times during So Day, and you're like, oh, this is their second from their last game, and they're doing a guessing game. I think I have like over 100 texts from you like, oh, they're gonna go over.
Yeah.
Why are they guessing right now?
I honestly, it seems like, with the exception of those longer games like guessing games or sort of mid-form games, that just in my experience, we do a pretty consistent. When we were doing beta testing in the first half hour of the show was short form, we would do 6 games. When we do the jam for 45 minutes to an hour, we do like 10 to 12 games. I think it's honestly kind of a, like, that's my caliber or calibration, but like I've also seen, I think we've talked about shows that do like longer short form and just play like you have like new choice going for the duration of like an 8-minute scene. So, you know, obviously part of it depends on, like, I think from community to community, people are doing like shorter or longer scenes for their games.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another common mistake people make is a lack of variety in their games. Like they set 2 games up back to back that basically had the same elements to it. Whether it's, every time I hit the bell, you have to impersonate a celebrity, or you do like Dreamcast where you play a celebrity, stuff like that. I think that's a really common mistake. Or casting too big. Like you got 25 minutes, but you have 25 people. Have you guys
like? I remember when we were in rehearsals for the showdown. That I think D'Angelo might have pointed out that like Pete and I were trying to introduce some of these Go Labs games into the showdown, and Chris brought up a really great question that was like, what does this showcase about improv? And he specifically was asking that about Enter the Dragon. And I thought that was a really great question. And on the same thread as the idea of variety, Bob, it's like, what kinds of like different aspects of improv and about like the strengths of a performer can we showcase? And I think that, go ahead, Pete.
I always thought, like, when we would come up with the short form games, in the back of my head was always, what aspect of improv is this focusing on or exercising for the improviser? And then yeah, sometimes with like Enter the Dragon, it was just like, fuck it, it's just a fun, high energy thing to do. Like Golden Ticket, the Willy Wonka game, which is a 3-person game. One person has the golden ticket, which basically means if they say anything, the audience has to laugh like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard, ever. And it's usually like if somebody signs up for the jam and they've never improvised before, that's usually the game that the hosts would have them play, because no matter what, they can just say, and a packed audience, goes that shit nuts laughing with it and like slamming on the tables and stuff. That doesn't really have, and then the other 2 improvisers are just improvising. That doesn't really have any added benefit other than to enhance the newer improviser, like to get them to feel more comfortable on stage. But it doesn't add anything improv wise to anything like that.
I think the one that we kind of discovered, that pocket of like, I'm going to lump in the golden ticket situation with absurdity, because what I think is
what
funny about that. What's that?
What Tilda says. We're going to add this game.
Yeah. Like, there's plenty of games that we did that were just like, some games were funny just because of the idea that people knew that we were making them up, brand new, making up ideas. So it's almost like this translation of like, when you're watching an improv show, you know that they're making it up, and so when like mistakes and contradictions happen, it's part of the joy of the high wire act of improvising, is the knowledge that the improvisers are doing that kind of carried over to some of the stuff that we were doing with game creation too, in like the longer process of the show. But for some games that work, and aren't just silly because we know that we're making up new games, things like Enter the Dragon or Golden Ticket, I think there's this absurdity about improv that is there. Whether it's for Golden Ticket, the idea that we made a rule that you have to applaud is really funny. Like, you have to, like, this person,
well, it's one of the few games like it doesn't affect the performer. It's truly the audience playing the game. That's what I like about that game.
Yeah. And it's also if nothing else, it showcases the support of the improv world, and it invites the audience in on that, is that like we're rooting for each other to succeed.
Right.
The Enter the Dragon is just absurdity in the sense that it's like, what if you had to stop everything because of some like wild fanciful disaster?
Yeah.
And
Or the Bjork game. The Bjork game was the how eccentric.
yeah,
That was just absurdity.
yeah. And so I think that's one category that I've discovered for myself that I think really fair point on Chris's part for being like, what are we supposed to be showcasing? Because I think that is a good question to ask with that also ties in the relationship between like you doing a scene or a performance and executing the rule of the game, is that like that can give you framing for like how to focus on it. And if it is just absurdity, then like I think that is a valid thing to exercise, is that like just do it because it's friggin' silly. That is part of improv. And there's obviously like reference point and acting and impressions and character and all these other things that are a little bit more straightforward to like acting and improv skills. But I think that it's a good question to ask while you're workshopping stuff.
Yeah.
Pete, what do you think about like casting wise, like for short form? And I should say we only have so much time. I think what's going to happen here is we're going to keep talking about short form, and then we'll end up doing a part 4 about long form. But like, what do you, when it comes to like casting a good short form ensemble, like are you looking for like a particular chemistry, or is it more an individual draft? Like,
I think it's more. I think it's more individual draft. I mean, because especially with like beta testing, because we had like so many people interested in being involved in stuff, that it kind of became let's make the most diverse group we can each week. And that's with playing style, among other things. Like, let's get an absurdist. Let's get what is the thing you call it? The ninja, the pirate, the robot.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes. And trying to mix up playing styles. And I think as we went along, and just from the experience of like, because we were also pulling these people mostly from classes, like who did we feel was the most up for aside from playing style, we would kind of add them into the group that we would pick from. And then it just became, how diverse can we make this cast? And then go from there.
Yeah. I really liked that we were doing a mix of newer and experienced people, because like you said, you would think sometimes that like, oh, the students who have only done a couple classes are going to have a hard time jumping into a show, but sometimes it really is the people that have been doing it longer that have a harder time getting back to being vulnerable and feeling uncertain about like, what is this game? I've never heard of it, and I don't know how to play it. And so sometimes it's an equal challenge to be met by more experienced improvisers and newer improvisers, and even sometimes the newer improvisers, because they're so excited to have the opportunity or haven't
still malleable.
And they haven't that they might even do the game in a more exciting, surprising way than somebody with more experience. So I agree and I think that's the benefit of short form too. I going back to what we were talking about earlier of like some of the games that we came up with, I know could be sharper if we rehearsed. But I also like the challenge of a short form game being like, explain it in a way that the and explain it and design it in a way that you could set it up for an audience and have them have a good enough expectation of what's going to happen. The improvisers can have a good enough expectation of what they're supposed to do, and have a fair enough shot at pulling it off.
Right.
I think that's a good challenge, and if you're doing that, then you can really involve people from all sorts of experience levels and playing styles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think people make that mistake when they first start hosting or directing short form shows, that they don't rehearse the explanation of the game. And you can see it. You can see when they get up there for the first time. Hey, everybody, we're gonna play challenge in a minute, and then you can see it go. They go right to their head and like, oh man, I played this 1,000 times. How do I, And then they go back and their explanation goes longer than the game.
Look, guilty.
Guilty. Totally guilty of it.
That happens a lot. I always like when it happens with the game Switch or freeze tag, depending on who's watching. Because there is that very strict script that we teach people that is just in and out. You know, I can rattle it off without any problem. But then a newer person comes in and, you know, they're somewhere in the middle of chapter 6 of their novella of how the game Switch works. And you're just like, oh, buddy, just play the game. The audience doesn't need this much. We don't need this much information.
Yeah.
And my favorite part is, and when I clap my hand, and then someone in the background will clap their hands and say, hey, Switch. Nope. That's
Yeah. And actually it's an interesting note too, Pete, because I know that when we were starting to write down the descriptions to be read and for, in developing a book, but we were writing down the descriptions and we were going back and forth on like, how much should we be explaining? And so two things. One, we separated like, we basically just like said out loud what we would say to set it up, and transcribe that into the intro that we wanted to have written, and we knowing that like, okay, we'll do a more detailed breakdown of like tips and mechanics as needed underneath that. But then in editing the description from how we would generally set it up, we were like, oh, what else can we do to make this not only clear, but like as tantalizing as possible? Like, how can we make it like fun? Can we punch it up basically? And I think that is like, that's it. Like if I were going to direct a short form show from scratch starting tomorrow, I would with like a process to it, I would want to have those setups succinct for sure, but some kind of like punchiness to it too,
with a little bit of flair.
What about thoughts on notes, Pete? Because we kind of like, you and I will debrief about how we feel like a show went. What kind of notes were we giving to, we had a rotating cast, but we also had like some anchors for the show. Remind me real quick. I'm going in 5 different directions here, but like when we were casting beta testing, 6 people per show for the short form side of things, and initially it was for the first like couple months it was the same 6 cast members before we opened it up in a longer run. Once we opened it up, I feel like we had like 2 captains that would play for the month, and then we would rotate in new people. Did we do that or did we drop it?
I think we did it in the beginning, and then we were struggling to get captains, so we were just like, screw it, we'll have a different cast every week. I think that was the initial idea, was that we'll have a captain that will play for a month, 2 captains that would be the anchor for the month. And then we couldn't get people to commit for a full month. So we were like, all right.
Yeah. And I guess it just comes into play in my memory of like, what kind of notes were we giving? Were we just kind of like making sure that we're setting up the context better or were we kind of like now when we do the virtual show, we'll hang back with the cast and we'll talk for like 10 to 20 minutes about like how any new games, how we thought they went, and any other things we want to try with games, whether they went well or not. And I like.
Well, I know that we did it because we did have at the beginning. We did have a rehearsal process when we first created beta testing. We did have a couple of rehearsals with the groups, and then we did have a dress rehearsal. And I remember that we did a lot more. How that game feel. What is there another way that you could see it that it might work or whatever. But then because of the nature of the show, with we would do the short form, and then we would excuse the test subjects, and then we would bring on the people that were going to do the long form with us. So there was no break. We just went into the long form portion of the show. So by the end, we had already gotten so set, we weren't taking notes during the short form portion, which we probably should have. But then by the time we got to the end of the actual full show, I think we were detached enough from the memory of how did the short form thing go that it just turned into, you guys good? You good? Everybody feel good about what they did? Awesome work. Or if anybody actually had any questions or concerns, we would address them. But I don't think we really did much in the realm of, especially towards the end, we were just like, great job, guys. We're going to do the next thing.
We got through it, and again, it's something particular to that show because of the whole we're doing it for the first time. There's no right way. There's no notes because you did it for the first time. You're the only one who succeeded. Well, okay. Last thing I want to talk about here as a general picture of improv directing, and we'll put a pin in long form. But what I really like about you and I as a directing team, Pete, is that I think that there's kind of two ends of a philosophy. I do love that you recurringly will be we just were like here's the thing and fuck it, we went on stage. And I think that is more in your that's how you approach things as a improviser and director. And I think that there's lots of people that approach it that way, and I think there's something essential about that makes improv work, where you can't be too precious or too organized or have too tight of expectations or rigidity around what you're doing. You have to keep it loose and chill.
Yeah.
And then there's my end of things where I tend to be really meticulous and conceptual about things. And I think that's again also a successful way to do it. But I think the nature of something like Go Labs, or the types of shows that you and I like to work on, where we're doing what we feel are cool things. That's our compass. We want to do cool, fun, interesting things, and we also want it to be challenging. I think that's a good blend and a balance to have. Be chill, don't overthink it, but also be strategic enough to about have enough of a plan to be okay, this is how we're building in a particular direction or challenge. I like that.
There have been times where I've just been dude, fuck it, let's roll. And you're no, we actually have to have this conversation in order for it to work. Yeah. And I'll be all right. And then we have the conversation. Oh yeah, we totally needed that. Or 100%. Or
I'll be like, yeah, I don't know. I was thinking that it makes sense to do this, but I'm just worried that what if we do it this way? And you're yeah, sure, we'll do, yeah. And then I'll be or I mean, honestly, if you think that we should do it the way that we were going to do it, do you think that it works better? And you're yes, we can do it that way. And I'm I'm overthinking this, aren't I? And you're yeah. Whatever way you want, we're just going to do it.
As someone who's been directed by both of you, I can totally see this going on.
Yeah.
But in your defense, James, most of the time you watch something, then you go home and think about it for 48 hours. Then you come to the next rehearsal, guys, here's what I've been thinking about. And you break it all down, let's just try it. So it's you're meticulous, but you don't project that onto your cast. And I think that's important, because if you brought that for lack of a better term, like neurotic like energy like into the cat, like then we all start overthinking, and then that's not comfortable. But I never felt like when you were doing that, like it was, overwhelming or anything.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think it's one of my like personal epiphanies, aside from just like rehashing the short form processes we've done during this conversation, is like, oh, there is those two things are essential. I think to maximizing your potential in a show for improv is keeping it loose and chill. You can't lose sight of that. That's part of the reason that people love it.
Yeah.
But it's just a tenuous balance between like doing that and then also being organized enough to it's that sincerity thing of like, are you sincerely trying to succeed at something? Is the payoff going to be bigger if you really go for it, whatever you're aiming at, and fail or succeed along the way? There's just an interesting aha moment for me during this conversation.
Well, I think another important thing that a director does is set an expectation as far as presentation and how professional and how the show should go. And even though you both have different styles of doing that, I think you both have a great way of setting that expectation. So, Pete may be a little bit loose at how he presents his information, but as a cast member, but he still expects this. We're not messing around here. We're putting on a show. So he might say fuck it, but we all can't say fuck it to everything.
Right.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, that is the point. Yes. I think it's also fascinating when you like, if I'm left to my devices, totally in charge with something like the Elastic Time Cannon, then that show happens.
Yeah.
When you're left to your own devices, with a lot of your sketch shows, like those are beautifully designed to go off the rails, in a way that like leans into that fuck it side of things.
Yeah.
And so I just, I don't know. It's still it's a developing thought in my head about those two styles.
There was what was the show? I got brought in to direct a show like 2 days before it was supposed to open. Like we switched directors, and I had to rework a bunch of stuff. That was like, I was Mr. Meticulous. I like came in, I had the game plan written out. If anybody had any input, I was just like, no, we have like 5 minutes before I got to do the next game. And I mean, it obviously has its benefits. Especially like in that instance when I had I think I had like 6 days to reblock and rework a whole show or something like that. Like in that instance, in no way can I be like, yeah, let's see what happens. Like, let's get up there, let's have some fun. Because we have 5 days, and there's only so many hours I can keep everybody together. So this has got to be as precise as it can possibly be in order for them to succeed.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a really great exploration of those two styles. And again, always enjoy talking about the stuff that we've done in pairing those two styles up, Pete. Yeah. Thanks for joining for this conversation. We will at some point down the line revisit
part 5, baby.
Yeah, we'll do a long form conversation.
It's the longest running series on the podcast. It's just
it's turned into a real saga.
Yeah,
but really,
I'll see you guys in March for part 4 and 5.
Yeah. Directing, I'll pay you one more compliment before we sign off here, because directing is something that I do. I could talk about for days and days and days, and I could especially talk about it with you, Pete, because like I said, you have so much experience. But I just that philosophy of like you're always open-ended or open-minded about like. You don't get too stuffy about your own philosophy, but you stay really malleable. You stay really open to new ideas and taking risks and not being rigid. You're very versatile, and so I could talk to you about old ideas, new ideas, and all different styles of process, and I really love that.
I love you guys.
Yeah.
Hey, love you, Pete. So that is it for this episode of the Improv Network podcast. And once more, you can check out all the Improv Network's offering on the improvnetwork.org. Fantastic website full of resources, including the Improv FAQ tab, where you can find all the videos in this conversation series, as well as lecture videos, blogs and interviews on the page as well. Check out make sure that you like and subscribe on Improv FAQ YouTube channel if you want to catch these live streams as they happen in the future. Also like the Improv Network Facebook page to make sure that you can catch them on Facebook through the Facebook stream.
Yeah. And don't forget to comment and send questions. We would like to hear back from you. These are ongoing conversations, so please, we want your input.
Yeah.
Or pit them against each other with who has the cooler mug.
Yeah. Yeah. Or when does it become 2 versus 1 or something completely different? You know, we're still having that conversation.
we should turn this into just like info wars for for improv.
I got my tactical wipes and my yes and.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thanks so much for joining. Thanks again, Pete. And we will catch you next time on the Improv Network podcast.